Hello, innovators. I'm Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator. Today I'm talking with Tuck Ross, marketing executive, digital media and digital marketing expert, speaker, creator, advisor, and TikTok expert, which we're excited about there. So, award-winning marketer, 18 years experience, man. That's crazy. Thank you for joining me on the Polymath Polycast.
Yeah, Dustin, thanks for having me. Excited to be here for sure.
It's going to be a lot of fun. This is a show by PolyInnovator, so please say hello to the innovators in the audience.
What's up, innovators? Yeah, I think we're all the same breed here, so excited to meet you guys, and I'm definitely excited to jump in.
Hello, and welcome to the Polymath Polycast. Well, and so the way I like to break the ice is to have you share something about yourself that no one knows about you.
Oof, that's a good question. I think one of the rare ones is I have 4 kids, which sort of adds to the polymath. There's a lot going on type of thing, and so that's always a fun topic. And I think it's like the second I step away from work, it's like into the other work, as it were, and having a blast.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. And I mean, a poly meaning much or many. You have many kids, so it makes sense.
Yeah, it's a party.
And so you've been through a lot of different jobs, it seems like, including Disney and all around the world. It seems our companies from around the world. And it's interesting, too, like Hasbro, too, no less. And so what was your mindset 5 years ago, and how have you changed since then?
Yeah, I think my mindset has always been learn as much as you can and don't stop learning. And that's been a big piece of who I am. I think and we'll talk about TikTok in a second, but every time a new social media platform comes, every time a new technology comes, I want to know about it because I think it enables me as an individual to be able to talk to it and be that expert in the organization, no matter who I'm working with, but also help educate others in thinking about how do we use this as part of a strategy? How do we use this or not? And then how do we develop results with it? And so I've always been of that mindset, and being curious is a part of who I am. I always want to know more. Quick example was, and part of this just helped me lean into it further, was I think about 5 years ago, an agency asked me something, and they told me, like, this is what we're going to do. And I didn't think it was the right thing, but I couldn't defend my point because I didn't know enough about what was going on at that time. And so it really just made me step back and be like, I have to know these things, right? So I can have a conversation, but also push back on the things that I knew maybe didn't fit with the strategy or were the right way to execute. And so as much as I'm in the strategy and thinking about that, I always like to be as tactical as possible so I can understand what's happening at the ground level as well, and inform sort of both sides of that spectrum.
Right. Well, you talked to Gary Vee at one point, even I saw on your feed there, where you're talking about clouds and dirt, so to speak.
Exactly. Yep. I love that.
Yeah.
People.
Well, and it's interesting, too, because when you're interested in the cloud so much, you get in a strategy. Like you said, you can't always defend your point when it comes to the details. And I think a lot of people who are systematic thinkers, they'll see the patterns in the cloud, so to speak. They'll see all the big picture kind of things and all the patterns coming forth. But they can't always articulate why those patterns are happening. I've certainly felt that, too. And I actually got in trouble at one point for acting upon those cloud notions without having the data or, like, what's the word, like you said, knowledge to back it up, so to speak.
Yeah, I think it's super critical, I think, for informing the strategy, but also for bringing your team along with you. And you think about individuals who are either on your team or looking to you to provide leadership and support, there will be more confidence in your decision, especially if you have that background and can say, yes, this or that. And it doesn't have to be 100%, but being a practitioner in this space gives you that authority to be able to make bigger decisions because you know how it works on the small level.
Right. And something you may be curious about, too, because I feel like we're both opportunists in this, where there's blockchain social networks out there.
Yeah.
So there's DTube, which is an alternative to YouTube, Steemit, which is now Hive, which is an alternative to like Reddit and Medium, actually combine them together. It's just interesting how those communities are forming. And I try to get my username on there as quick as possible, so in case it does blow up, I have it already there. Yeah,
exactly. It's a good philosophy, I think, on any platform, is to just jump in and stake your real estate, as it were. But yeah, I think blockchain is this whole other thing that needs to be explored, and I think is sort of under talked about right now, just because it's complex. And I think a lot of people don't have the time to think about what does it actually mean in terms of the context of what we're trying to do next.
Right. Well, and speaking of TikTok too, we're not just TikTok, but like this blockchains. Speaking of just different platforms in general, TikTok's one of your main ones you've been working on, and part of your 10-day course, actually, one of the first things is like staking your real estate on those steps, and that way you can actually have your name there in case you do want to go back to it if you're not ready yet.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even if you're just going to check it out, I think there's a lot of hesitation still around the platform because people don't know it. They may not understand it. Whether you're an individual or a business, jump in there, get your @handle set up. Just put an account up. You don't even have to post any content. Just make sure it's there because you never know. And it's going to be much harder to grab later as everyone keeps going into it. 100 million users this year now with a growth of about 60 million just this year alone. So just a phenomenal growth rate. And it's a time to jump in and at least have that, to your point, stake it out if you're not creating yet.
Well, and I remember, I think it was on the Authority project I was listening in that you were on, and you mentioned how there was like a trajectory of where they were going to be, and they surpassed it by a great margin, it seems like, from what I recall you saying.
Yeah, eMarketer had been pegged at about 45 million active users this year by end of year, and now we're nearing the end of year. And Tech Talk is saying that there are over 100 million active users in the U.S. and globally. That's crazy. They're upwards of 1 billion now, and they're starting to get in that range of where some larger networks like Instagram are in terms of scale and scope. So while they are still under the radar, and you and I were just chatting about this, while they're still under the radar in a lot of businesses, a lot of places, very nascent sort of ad model, they're becoming a massive contender in terms of engagement and attention.
Yeah, and ads, it seems like, too. Like, I actually think they're decently successful with ads. I think it's kind of annoying. When you first come on, you're stuck with an ad right there. That's a new thing that came about. But they have ads in the feed as well, the For You feed. And it actually seems very intuitive or just part of the ecosystem.
Yeah, they have five actually major ad types now, and then they have Creator Marketplace, which is a formal version of an influencer marketing program where they're actually fostering and developing relationships with influencers to help grow that and connect them with brands. So, any one of those programs is anywhere from 40 to 170,000, including some e-commerce features for those ad sets themselves within TikTok. So yeah, they're trying to grow that, and they actually just launched their self-service platform, much like Facebook ads, in August, and it's something that's I think going to take off next year for sure as more people jump in.
Yeah, I was actually really wanted to do those ads, but I didn't really have anything at the moment that I wanted to advertise. But it's like interesting how that was a cool opportunity. You mentioned on the other show too that they have like a $300 bonus too if you get started early on. Yeah,
depending on when this post, that ends actually in 4 days on the 15th. Oh, wow. So hustle if you're for you. But I think what's cool is that they are trying to encourage more people to adopt the platform and get into ads really quickly because it's just a benefit. There's $300 for free, right? But I think we'll see more opportunities like that going forward where they are trying to encourage more development of that self-service model, much like Facebook has.
Yeah. And right before we get into the questions there too, it's interesting. I was watching a video on Vine of all things before our call today, and it was a YouTube channel, Company Man, which is really cool. He talks about all these different companies and how they operated. And he was mentioning how they couldn't get any income in. They weren't finding a good monetization model. And they thought about doing ads, but at this point, a 5 to 6 second ad, it's just as long as the videos. And so it's very disruptive in the way that people are flowing through it. And even if they were to do it after a couple of viewings, like over different times, they focused on loops, it'd be interesting how they weren't able to do it. But TikTok is just the same kind of model for the most part, but with longer videos. And so the ads aren't as disruptive, it seems, in the flow, despite the fact the strategy seems to be the same. Yeah. Which is interesting.
I fully agree with your perception. I think the pieces that are working of that ad model are the ones that the brands that are actually leveraging either creators that are already there, right, and leveraging them as part of their program as influencers, or developing content that's very native in context with the way the rest of the TikTok videos are, because they don't feel like ads that way. They do feel like you're engaging with content, and the product is just a piece of that narrative.
It's always nice too when they actually use the actual audio that's trending or something like that too.
Yeah, and TikTok will actually help you secure that music as part of those programs.
Nice. Yeah. And actually go into the questions here then too, because we were going to go on a long tangent there. Yeah. One thing you're known for is this TikTok challenge that we mentioned earlier. And so I'm curious, what is that about and what brought you to create it?
Well, when I first started on TikTok, it was actually Musically way back. And I jumped on the platform probably, what was it, 2016, 2017, something like that. And I went in, it was literally all 16-year-old girls, and I just felt awkward. And so I left. I came back when it aged up a little bit, and there was some more diversity on the platform, which was last year. It was TikTok now. And I was like, I got to figure this thing out, right? Because people are starting to talk about it a little bit more. I want to know what's happening in the platform. Started on my own path, right? And I just wanted to see what could work. And so I was just tossing out. I actually deleted my account 3 times, reset. reset. And then I just hit on this thing where it's like, I'm a dad, I drink once in a while, I got problems at home, right? You got to kind of figure out like, what are you doing in your life? And entertaining kind of parent content, and that's something that resonates because mommy bloggers are a big deal, parenting content, things like Pinterest, right? All those are very, strong drivers, and there's a lot of success happening there. And being on the other side where like there's very few dads on the platform, it was a good niche to be in, focusing on those types of topics, but sort of like in the yin and the yang of what the moms were talking about, and that actually started to take off. And so I started to drive really hard into that. I was doing 3-4 videos a day at one point, and just trying to really figure out what was working, what was not, which music to use, the rest of that. I think the thing that, I honed in on is, especially with my my age target, right, which was about 35 to 50, about 90% of my audience is women, and a lot of them were parents, and moms specifically, right, in the platform, is that they're looking for someone to empathize with around these things that were happening, especially with their kids, but also through pandemic, right, and all the things that were changing as part of that, and really driving into that. Additionally, the nostalgia, right? All of us coming from an era where like 80s, 90s, 2000s, like the music that was part of that, not even trending music that was out there now, but things that were, nostalgia always has a play on any platform, but especially around the music, because music's such a big piece of that, driving specifically into that and saying, hey, how do we make this fun with Sir Mix-a-Lot and Vanilla Ice and all the other things out there, doing ridiculous dances, pretend like you're back at prom, the rest of those things, which started to work. And so, I just went really hard at it for about, 3 months, and then I tailed off a little bit into the next 6, and just left it and got it to about 40,000 followers just to try, right? And so I said, hey, part of this was a learning experience. I'm not invested in becoming a TikTok influencer, but what I wanted to do was learn so I could share and take that into, and they've got some more materials coming, but really this free 10-day challenge. So if you want to check that out, it's followontiktok.com to go check that, or you can find it on my website. It's just to get you started. Just to get people into the platform and help them understand how it works. And then really the next level is, once you start to engage, it's really thinking about how do you create and develop your content, which is what I'm working on next, to really hone in on how do you make a good video and what matters as part of a good video, especially because not just for creators themselves, but also for, like we talked about, brands trying to make ads, same formula, because you want to figure out how to create an engaging piece of content, whether it's 15 up to 60 seconds, and really keep people not only hooked at the beginning, but watching all the way through, because that's what the TikTok algorithm values, is that time you spend in the video, the time you spend watching the video, what you're engaging with as you go, how you comment and like, but also if you rewatch it. Right? Because if something's really fun, you're going to rewatch it again. That actually gives it more credibility to the platform, and we'll show it to more people as it goes.
It's interesting too, because when you're talking about conversions, not conversions, but like just watch time and being hooked on, those are all things I learned from YouTube and whatnot. Yep. And it's interesting just how those translate over to TikTok as well. And even though I knew that, and I knew I needed to make sure I have a good heading and good tags and good format, so to speak, I just never really thought about it in that way of just putting it into that structure. And I know I need to, but I never went around and tried it, so to speak. I've actually been on Musical.ly as well since Musical.ly.
Love it.
Maybe not as long, but I think close to it. How much you want to bet it was like Gary Vee getting you on there too?
No, actually, it was something that I just found out because I was a big, I'm kind of a karaoke nerd sometimes, and like to go out. So I was like, oh, this is super fun, right? And to the thing is like stake your name and put it on there, and I just forgot about it for a while. And there was a month where I had to do password resets and wait for them to clear my name and all the rest of that, but finally got back on when it was TikTok because they had transitioned. But yeah, it was it is something that is really interesting to kind of figure out how that engagement model works. And to your point, there is a structure for a lot of these, right? Like just human behavior basis. I think that I used this stat in a presentation years ago, and it's still probably even shorter now, but 6 seconds attention span of a goldfish. Microsoft actually did a study. Humans have about 6 seconds attention span before they've changed directions. Well, 6 seconds is not coincidentally, by the way, the same length of a Snapchat ad, the same length of a YouTube bumper ad, the same kind of minimum length that you see in a lot of platforms for ads, because that's the attention span length. But if you shorten that in half, 3 seconds is actually the time that you have before someone starts to scroll in most cases, which is why Facebook's timer on you paying for an ad is 3 seconds. By the way, that's pretty universal now, is that 3 seconds across the board is where that charge happens, because within 3 seconds, people are making a decision on whether to scroll past your content. So you have to get people in that hook right at the beginning, and then you have to think about what are they doing in 6 seconds and what are they doing up to 15 seconds for you to close that narrative, especially in a shorter video format.
I've definitely seen a lot of people be like, wait, don't stop scrolling or something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
I also got a little beef with you as well because I am a big Queen fan and I saw one of your videos on TikTok that was like dun 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 dun, dun and it ended up being Vanilla Ice and I was like, oh, tough.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you gotta go both ways, right? Because I think
Yeah,
both would work depending on your audience, right?
right. Well, and it's interesting too because Queen was my first karaoke like artist that I sang.
Oh yeah. Well, and if you can't do 9 minutes of Bohemian Rhapsody on a karaoke stage, I don't think you're into karaoke.
Yeah, it's always fun being able to get to those points of the highs and lows. What's one of your favorite karaoke songs?
That one, yeah, I
That
think
Bohemians.
I think Sir Mix-a-Lot, young MC Bust a Move is always just a breath taker because if you're not like on your game, you'll run out of breath real quick on that one. And then yeah, always Black Eyed Peas is fun, and something that's in the Latin realm like a Shakira or something like that is good to go with too.
Yeah, I did Selena one day too. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
Yeah. In fact, the other day, not the other day, it was a little while back. I did Malcolm
sure.
Moore Downtown, which was a lot of fun.
Oh yeah,
It was hard though.
yeah. Some of the songs that the pacing, right? You go with a Busta Rhymes or something like that. The pacing is just insane.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too because we were talking about just the different kind of endeavors you had on TikTok. You came back a few different times, and one of the things I did is I did this campaign of intentional related posts, where I even made a tag that related them all together. Back in like a year and a half ago, there was this trend going on, like putting their hand, the camera up to the mirror and saying, "This is my voice one day in this place."
Okay, yeah.
Come back and this is my voice 1 week in this place. And I found over a dozen different audios like that. And so I did all of them all in like a big sprint and related them all together. And I was able to have them, like that way if someone clicked that, they could see all the ones I did too. And I was able to get a nice big boost from 200 followers to a little under 1,000.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
now I'm like 2,800 at this point, but that's like over a year later. So the thing, part of that had to do with like the niching down to that trend or niching down to a certain theme on the channel, so to speak. But since Polymath has been around my theme or niche or ethos, it's kind of hard to just find one thing. What is your thoughts then on getting that kind of growth without having that niche, so to speak?
Yeah, I think there's really two types of content that if we just want to be very generic in the buckets, there's the evergreen content. And if you're a business, think about this like your FAQs or the value props of your brand. If it's for you, it's what are your personal values? What is your niche and how do you focus on that? And consistently repeat that over time so people know who you are, right? I think the other piece of that is trends and following trends. And you can see that when you jump into the Discover tab and you're seeing the hashtags stack down. Those are the hottest things happening on the platform and the ones that are burgeoning in terms of exposure and awareness. I think if you look at the two of those, to your question, I would follow trends and you can still have your personal brand, have your niche, but then diversify into fun ways to interpret that with the trends that are out there, right? And it's not necessarily copying what's out there, but putting your own flavor, your spin, your message on it in that context. And maybe sometimes just reusing the song. It could be you reusing a dance, but it could be also a way that you illustrate your point or topic within that. And it gives you that opportunity to get a little more diverse, I think.
Okay. Well, and I think that's kind of what I've been trying to do too, where to go a little bit comedies,
Yeah.
a little bit more dancing, that kind of thing. Although there's a lot of posts that I've made that are probably just not as funny as they used to be. So I need to make sure I work on that quality first in the hook.
Yeah. And honestly, it's a good policy to keep reviewing your videos too. Like the ones that don't pop as much, those are okay to hide. You don't have to delete them. You want to keep those like count up and they'll still show up there just like on YouTube. But you can hide those ones that aren't as popular because then people won't engage with those and skip them because that actually damages your algorithm when you have videos that are skipped by people.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And there's this idea that I've talked about with some people, is this idea of a retalk or like a retweet in a way. Because there's a lot of videos that you and I both have from ages ago that are really good, that are really cool to share again to this new audience. But there's no way of doing that without just reposting the video or duetting it or something like that. But what if they introduce that feature?
Yeah, I think that'd be a super cool feature, but I think, TikTok values the creativity, the freshness of the platform. I've actually taken some of mine, downloaded them, re-uploaded them, and they've done okay. And, some of those have done maybe even half of what the original ones did, but it doesn't go to the scale. And I think maybe because they recognize that it's a re-upload and they maybe limit it, right? I don't know if that's true, but it does feel like some of that's happening to reduce that exposure. I think a good way to think about it, though, is instead of maybe just on TikTok, anything that's working on TikTok, you could also mimic on Reels. Right. And Reels is a little bit different format. It is a copycat product. But if you think about like what's working on TikTok, the popular videos, the ones that take off there, especially if you're timely in Instagram, those really work. And, if you go back to evergreen types of content, things like makeup tutorials, information on retail and products, those are things that work universally anywhere, right? Pinterest, even and YouTube and so forth. So those are good ones to actually take into other places as well.
Interesting. I did do a compilation video as well,
Okay.
like getting 30 videos putting together. Now, getting to some of the other questions here, because we have a lot to go over, it seems like.
Yeah.
But you have spent 18 years in marketing, like we said in the beginning. And if you could condense your learnings down to one line, what would that be?
Yeah, I think it's really about customers job one. If I go through my entire career and think about what's been the most important piece and where I found success, it's really, less about, what is the strategy? What is this? What is that? It's really starting with the customer and stepping all the way back and saying, what does the customer find of value from this business? Why do they care about us? Why would they spend time with us? Why is there attention with us? Thinking about Disney and where it started, they're about entertainment. They're about the experience of entertainment and the stories that come with entertainment. And you think about that piece of it, then you can really lean into, okay, well, what do I need to build around that? I was a product manager at Disney ABC, building digital product to help run ad-supported television, right? And we really built the backbone of what became Hulu and helped launch that. And all of that now is lended into Disney Plus. And so it's cool to see that progression of the business, even though it's taken a while to get there. But again, it's about the experience, the delivery system of the stories, and all of us relate with stories, especially if they're good stories. And that's what Disney's built its business around, is the IP, the franchises of the strongest stories that we have today, which is Star Wars and Marvel and all the other, original Disney Mickey IP that Walt Disney came up with himself. So I think if you go back into that and what that means, any business, Disney, Hasbro, Guitar Center, it's thinking about, what does the customer need from us? What do they want? What are they looking for? What makes us a little bit different than competitors? And how does the consumer find that value with us? Because once you attach to that, it gives you the ability to drive that sale, right? But I think what I look for next is the loyalty, like have them come back again. It doesn't matter to me if they make one. I only care if they make two or consecutive after that, because then it gives you the ability to say, hey, why are you back here? What did we do right the first time? And then continue that into advocacy, where they're actually becoming a vocal supporter, right? Your influencer, your customer is your best influencer if they're loyal to you, and they can carry that business forward in a way that you can't, because it's much more authentic when it comes from them.
Yeah. Well, just for example, we're using Riverside.fm to record this, and the experience I've had on this platform makes me rave about it on other platforms. I tell people about it.
Yeah.
And I know that Disney Plus too, as it's grown, they have all that original content. In fact, Netflix, the alternative, they're a big player in the space. They've been spending 15 years getting original content, but Disney Plus came out with it already in hand. And that's a really big strategy difference there.
Yeah, I think Netflix had a big hurdle because they got to build it up from scratch, right? But the good news is that they had a first mover advantage, and they've just been building up, which is why they've been able to deliver so much content during the pandemic when everything's been shut down, and Disney's had that lag because they haven't been able to produce. But if you saw the earnings announcement recently, they just came out with a full massive increase in their slate. 10 new Disney shows, 10 new Star Wars shows, new Marvel shows, releasing movies directly on Disney Plus, just a complete shift in their strategy. And now they're leaning so much into Disney Plus. It's actually exciting because I think it's going to benefit not only the consumer of Disney Plus, but I think it's going to benefit the space because it's introducing more competition to Netflix, which was really sort of standalone. There was no one competing with it. And it's going to be very hard, I think, for anyone else now, HBO Max, the rest of these types, to try and catch up to the scale of what Netflix and Disney Plus are going to be able to do in the space.
Definitely. And just recently, too, like you said, they announced all that, but there's been a lot of rumors about the Ahsoka show, for example. And I'm really excited about that one because I had heard about it, and then they confirmed it like yesterday, day before, and it was just super exciting to see. But there's also so many other on the plate as well that are super exciting about it.
And I love that they're bringing back old stories, right? Like Willow is going to have a TV show, and Willow, if you've ever watched the movie, is like, I mean, that's from way back, right? But it's such a strong story that everyone was like, oh, please do something with that. And they are. And bringing back Fantastic Four again, even though that probably should be buried because it died so many times, right? But now they're trying to revive it again and taking Star Wars in so many different directions beyond just Jedi, and doing Rogue Squadron with the Wonder Woman director, right? And there's all these cool ideas that they're coming, and they can go so many directions with it to continue to expand the universe of the stories that we all love.
Yeah. Oh, and I love how they're taking that kind of mentality of the MCU from Marvel and putting it into Star Wars as well, which is cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what was your two stints at Disney and Disney APC? How did like you talked about that just a moment ago, but how did they view marketing differently? How did they view the world differently too?
Yeah, I think for Disney, the big thing is the experience is the product. And they started out with very strong IP, which became franchises. You start out with Mickey and the stories behind Snow White and the princess, and all the rest of these. But I think when you go into really how they manifested that and the parks being the centerpiece of a lot of that, it is the experience. I remember being at Disney and especially in the park side at corporate alliances and walking through. And I mean, you get a training before you go into the park because you can't go in with the expectation, hey, we're just going to walk around. No, you're on stage When you go in, you are an executive, but everyone's the same. If you see a piece of trash and you walk by it, you actually have to leave because everyone picks up trash, no matter what your level is. You're always greeting a guest. They call them guests, and you're always greeting a guest, no matter who you are. Say, hey, how are you today? We're excited you're here. And so I think I really love that mentality because, if for any business, thinking about your customer as a guest, thinking about the experience as the product, as the service, I think those two things coming together is really how, I think about consumer experience and the pieces that go into that, because Disney did such a good job of putting those together, but then running the narratives through those so that the experience is the context, but the stories are what we attach to. And then it's almost like this little boat that you get to ride in and enjoy it, because it's a different type of way that they connect these things. It's not just entertainment, it's the whole thing put together.
Well, and the way that Disney World, for example, does that whole experience, like you're saying, and when you go there, you feel like you're in Disney, even just the atmosphere, the vibe, like you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's immersive.
Well, and I really find that CX and customer experience is really interesting, and how many companies are aiming for the smoothest possible process. And Disney's obviously very good at it. What are some things people should think about most in the coming decade for us about that whole customer experience field?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I just mentioned, right? But I think every business, you see this a lot now, is saying, hey, we've got to have the best consumer experience. It has to be easy. It has to be convenient. It has to be simple. We want to make the transaction, seamless. If everyone does that, there's no competitive advantage there. And I think that's the biggest miss about that whole conversation, is that everyone is talking about doing the exact same thing. So what happens when everything's easy, convenient, invisible transaction, and so forth? You really have to go back to relying on the product, the service, what you have to offer, the value exchange of your product. And so I think really what we want to talk about in CX, the way I would say that we want to talk about CX, is the product and service coming together with the experience so that it has a context. Because I think that's where you find competitive advantage now. It's everything coming together, right? Netflix is not just the content itself, it's how you engage. It's the recommendations that come with that for them to be able to surface out of all the content that they have, that you should watch this one thing right now because it's top of your list, right? I think all those things coming together. TikTok is the same way, right? The algorithm helping you, the people creating, them getting exposure, the number of followers you can get on the platform, all of that mixed together creates that very addictive experience. And it is addictive, right? And people are spending a massive amount of time on the platform, more than some others, especially in terms of that massive growth, because it's entertainment and it's interesting, but it's also the context of that. Meanwhile, you see Quibi fail, right? And you can say that Quibi did a good job at anything. They just blew through a bunch of, and they blamed it on the pandemic. But look, TikTok, every other social platform, double-digit growth during this period, double-digit growth, Disney Plus meeting its subscriber goal and beating it, Netflix, massive growth, and then Quibi fails. It can't be about just the experience, because Quibi was touting the experience. They said, hey, this is the best app. You can do these cool things. You can move around, but their content was shit, right? And so you say, hey, how do we actually get better? It's the two of them coming together, the product and the experience, and that's how you create competitive advantage.
Yeah, they had like great directors, great people. They even had influencers on multiple platforms spewing it out. And yet the content was just mediocre from what I was told. And I didn't even try it out, even though there was a free trial. Supposedly there was a lot of conversions to getting on the trial, but no one actually stayed after that.
Yeah, it just wasn't compelling.
Yeah. Well, I think that too with Netflix is interesting. I think Disney Plus does this as well. They change the thumbnails to see what's most attractive to the eye and how they do the contrast of the text on the image too. I find that fascinating, the graphics design behind it too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the interface is as much of the experience, for especially digital products, and that ease of use for sure. But it's also how that connects with the product and what you get out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so one thing I find interesting too, that I've tried to build my brand around, is this omni-channel marketing, especially as a solopreneur too. Yeah. And a lot of companies you work for are very well-known omni-channel brands, Disney and Bank of America. So what do you think it takes to be omni-channel successfully?
I think you have to think about it as, hey, we want to be omni-channel, but when you look at it, it is still individual channels, and looking at even platforms within those channels and how do you engage. So maybe it's called sub-strategies, as it were. But I think looking at, again, going back to the customer, it's less about the channels for me and more about how is that customer working in that channel? What are they looking for? What is their attention? How does it work? Because TikTok, while it's a video platform and a CMS, it's very different than YouTube. It's very different than what you see video on Facebook. It's even different than Instagram, which looks and feels very similar, but it's radically different. And so I think while we would consider all of those social, a lot of them have video in the context, you would think about your customer engagement. The way you even create your content is different for each one of those. And so I do fully believe that if you're going to go omni-channel, which a lot of cases would include everything from retail to social to programmatic display, content on sites to, active stories like video and the rest of that, you would want to think about how you work on each of those independently and or pre-plan so that you can create content once and then version it for each platform as opposed to just sending it out the same way across each.
Yeah, the way that you approach the content repurposing as well as the macro and micro, or clouds and dirt, so to speak.
Yeah, that's a great way to say it.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I often find it, I believe that the right combination of strategy, automation, and execution, like we're saying there with the clouds and dirt, you could accomplish being omnichannel. What are your thoughts on doing that well then as like a solopreneur? How could someone do that? And obviously, you're not going to be a global brand as a solopreneur, but I'm just curious, so to speak. What is out there?
Yeah, no, I think the sound strategy is important. I think being responsive in your strategy and adapting it as you go. I mean, this is a year, no better example to look at your strategy and say, is this still working? Do I need to adapt it? I think a lot of cases the strategy be consistent, but how you execute that strategy may change depending on the tactics and the environment that is driving some of those changes. But I think to your point, I think the one word that I would pick at there a little bit is automation. I think it's hard to automate in some of these channels because especially social, right? Social's relationships, social's people, and people interact in relationships. And I think it's really key for us to remember that to be successful in social, there can be some automation, but I would actually describe that as some of the pieces like easing distribution, right? Like you can use tools for that. You can use planning tools to help get your content. Planning ahead is helpful with your content. You mentioned it, right? Like that atomization, but thinking about how do you build something like we're doing a video, we're doing an interview here, but then that can turn into a podcast. It can turn into audio snippets. It can turn into a tweet. It can turn into this, but versioning it for each platform and adapting it to how each audience would consume that in a little bit different way, I think makes it more adaptable going forward. But you may not necessarily be able to automate as much of that as you can version it and pre-plan so that you can actually fragment it out into the different platforms as needed.
Definitely. I mean, that's the Gary Vee content model right there too, where you're breaking it down to different chunks. And
for sure.
Automation, it can be kind of scummy if you do it just overboard.
Yep.
One thing I think is very key there is the distribution aspect, where you're distributing the links, for example, to this, but then you have engagement that is actually native and you doing it, not just automating that or getting some kind of bot to do it. I do audio from this. This is video, so it goes on YouTube and Facebook, and eventually IGTV. But then I'm also going to be doing the audio for all the different platforms as well. Yeah,
I would expect nothing less, right? And I think that's the way to do it. And it's across, there's so many ways to do things now. That's what's great. I think it's winnowing down and thinking about where's the best audience, because I think sometimes, to your point, there are almost too many options for us to think about. And I'd rather pick and choose maybe 5 that each of us can do really well, especially if you're starting out, you're new, maybe this is more complex. Build and stack as opposed to trying to tackle them all at once. Get really good at 1, 2, 5, 10, and then expand from there, because I think that, will increase your focus. It also give you the ability to sort of set one plate spinning and then move on to the next one as you go.
And I think that's interesting too for polymathy in general as well, because it's a level of macro and micro focus where, like, what are you focusing on in general? Okay, you want to be on these different platforms.
Yeah.
What strategy then are you going to do? What thing are you going to do first? Because I started out with blogging. That was my first plate that I spun. Sure. Then I did podcasting. Then I learned more about social. Then I learned more about video. And it's one of those things where you had to do one thing at a time. Yep. And then you can do all of it at once.
Yeah. Agree. Yeah, I think it makes a ton of sense that way.
Well, and before this call too, we talked about how you wear multiple hats, and you even said that you thrive in that lifestyle. So all these different plates spinning, so to speak. What have you been doing to make that interdisciplinary life for yourself?
Yeah, I think it's focus. I think it's focused on my values, focus on my goals, focusing on my passions, and what really helps guide that is just being curious. And I think a lot of that is, me just being interested in all these different spaces. Like you mentioned, like I want to figure this out. I don't want to be the one in the room that can't explain these things, but also because it helps me understand it, and then I can teach it to others, hopefully, right? And figure out how to move content, media, even, going back to what we just talked about, stories through these spaces, whether it's my personal brand or a business's story, to be able to do that. And so I think being curious is a big core of what anyone who's a polymath or thinking about doing multiple things, because you want to solve for these things in a broad way. You want to understand how they work and how they can ultimately solve problems and answer questions.
Yeah, curiosity is definitely a big theme of the show, I found. And I
Sure.
even had one guest came up with the idea of geniosity,
Okay.
combining like genius with curiosity, which was really cool.
That's cool.
And you kind of sort of answered this too, but I want to answer directly too. Is something I ask all my guests is, what is a polymath to you then?
Yeah, I always was inspired in going through school about learning about like Leonardo da Vinci and Benjamin Franklin and all
Yeah.
these greats through time that we tend to forget about. But you look at the breadth of what they did, and maybe they're known for one thing, right? Like just invented the light bulb or whatnot. But they took a lot of steps to get to their point. A lot of failures, a lot of trials, and a lot of diversity in what their skill set was. And I love that. And I was so interested in someone that could cover the range. And I think it was just because they were curious. They wanted to figure things out, and they wanted to know things that weren't known. And I think for all of us, that's a great mindset. I tell it to my kids. It's like, hey, I don't want to eat this food. And I'm like, you didn't even try it. I'm like, just be curious, just try it. Right. And a lot of this is just try, because you don't know what could happen out of that. And maybe you end up liking something more than you thought. But it's that relentless curiousness, the restlessness, the looking for problems to solve, and answering the questions I think that are out there that gives me the motivation. I think that's where a lot of that stems from.
Yeah, I'm not a parent, but I've definitely taken a lot of care of my little sister, for example. And when I try to get her to play a video game, she used to be really scared of the monsters for some reason, even though she loved the game.
Yeah.
And so I was like, just go over there and try it. Like, if you fail, you die. It's a game. It doesn't matter. It's fine. It's okay to die. It's okay to fail. And she'd be like, oh, no, I want to do it. And then eventually I'd get her to try it. And she's like, okay, that was easy. And then the boss came around and she wouldn't do it. And it's like, okay, well, we'll sit back and then try it. Just indulge that curiosity. What's going to happen? And then eventually she'd do it. She's like, okay, this wasn't that bad.
Yeah, I think all these things, talk to our relationship with failure, and the fear of moving into some of these areas is just, how do you fear failure? And if you don't feel failure as much, or embarrassment, or some of the other things, and you learn to address that with yourself and say, you know what, I'm just trying this thing. And to your point, maybe you end up dying, you have to reset, or you just bail, right? Like, I'm not going to do it anymore. It doesn't make sense for me. Cool. But at least and you can swipe that off. You don't have to have that nagging feeling of, oh my gosh, like, I never did that. I wish, right? And it reduces regret, I think.
Yeah, and I think there's an interesting philosophy there too. Like, it's okay to bail and come back or something like that.
Yeah.
I play a game called Apex Legends, which is a cool battle royale. There's a whole bunch of people on the map. Sometimes you're outmatched, and I think a lot of people get into that competitive mindset, or just like, oh, we're here, we have to stay here. No, you can leave and then come back or something like that, or leave and just continue on your way. It's okay to leave that engagement and then try to do something else, because sometimes you may not be good enough in that case.
Yeah,
but you can move on to something else and then go down that path instead.
Yeah, and I think that fear is an interesting topic, and I love that conversation, because if you look at what happened in the pandemic, even like on the business side, a lot of businesses, when this happened, they just hesitated, they stopped. And I think the biggest key is, you think about sharks, they keep moving, they can't stop. And in my business and a lot of other businesses, they kept going, and they figured out, how do we move? Because that's a philosophy, is just always on. And the businesses that stopped are struggling, right? They had to figure out how to reset. And sometimes they didn't have a choice, right? Like, restaurants had to shut down. Some of these places had to shut down, but a lot of them adapted, right? They became ghost kitchens. They became ways to figure out how to deliver food. How do I sell memberships to my food? How do I, sell gift cards? And a lot of them innovated during that time where there was struggle. And I think failure and fear help create things like innovation and moving us forward, especially if you're determined to not stop and find, again, the new way to find your customer, because there may not be an answer ready for you. We may not have all the answers or the information to be able to make those decisions. But then moving forward in a mindset of, my strategy is sound, I know what I want to do, I have a good product to sell, how do I create a new experience?
Yeah. Well, one of the guests I had on the show, Mark Schaefer, who's really renowned in the marketing field, I loved him. He was talking about this idea. He created this business pandemic playbook, and how businesses need to adapt if they're not appealing to the basic needs. When we're sitting in a pandemic, people are worried about rent or getting enough income for food and being able to take care of their families. And some businesses who are focusing more on self-actualization or kind of just luxuries, that kind of thing, those kind of businesses aren't needed at that particular point. Right. Those are the ones that need to adapt. And I found it was interesting how, like, when restaurants had to close, some of them didn't close all the way. Like, there was a pizza restaurant in New York who found out what kind of plastic they could melt in their oven that they usually made pizza for. And so they've started making plastic shields for coverings of the face instead. It's like, that's brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the one that was excited me the most is when that happened. The first business that I saw move, which is unexpected, is the fashion industry. And they started making cloth masks as fast as they could at every factory for some of these even luxury brands, right? And they're just like giving them away, right? Because that was the right thing to do. And they're like, we have people sitting around that can sew stuff. Why don't we make masks? And I thought that was an incredible strategy, not just from even a PR perspective, but just keeping people active and helping solve a problem.
Yeah. Well, if anything, too, there's the whole idea behind just the workforce inside your company. Like, are they being active? Are they keeping their skills sharp? Are they actually doing the things they need to do?
Right.
I think there's some people who move to remote working, and that's one thing that's been growing, as you know, is like the whole remote working field. A lot of people are working more in their circadian rhythm, so they're actually working better than they were before. But there's also the idea of just keeping their skills sharp too.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Agree.
So, considering your vast brand marketing experience too, what has your personal brand been like considering to create in this whole past few years?
Yeah, I think it took a little while to reset after the pandemic started, just because there was so much change happening. But I think the big thing for me was thinking about, like, how do I adapt and do more myself? And I actually put some of these goals that I've had on the plate for a little bit and started moving them forward. And so I did launch a training site. I did launch some of the other things and started to put some more content out, and that's actually increasing. So I have a few things, coming up. I have more intended for next year. And a lot of that's just because, I had to backburn them for a little bit, but now it's leaning into it and saying, and I'm a big believer in helping train and teach. It's like, how do I bring, to your point, 18 years and the rest of that? Like, it sounds like a good number, but for me, it's like the experience, the learnings I have. There's people coming up that need that, and they haven't had that ability to transition from a traditional space into a digital marketing space. How do I help them understand how to build strategies and think about the things that we're talking about? Because I think that's a value and a skill set that needs to be had, and getting out of that single channel mindset, which there's a lot of specialization happening, and also being able to think about it from that comprehensive generalist perspective, not too broad in the way that you lose the context, but in that context, deciding, again, like we talked about, how do you deliver value via an experience to that consumer and connect that with the product or service?
It's almost like, how do you deliver value in an omnichannel experience as a polymath too, no less. But
right.
It is interesting too, because I've actually compared many LMSs, so most of them at this point, and I saw that you use Podia, and I was like, Podia is one of the best ones, so I wanted to tip the hat to you for that.
Oh yeah, no, thanks for that. And that was like months of research and trying out a bunch of different ones, and actually built on 3 platforms and deprecated them and moved them over, including Kajabi and I forget the other one. Thinkific.
Thinkific, yeah. Well, and I was using a lot of the LMSs on WordPress too, but a lot of them are hit or miss too. And so, how would you define Tuck Ross at this point?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, for me, and some of this is just feedback I get too, right? Is high energy, engaging, hustling, a little fun, a little edgy, thoughtful, knowledgeable, especially marketing, digital marketing, and social media. And if I think about when people hit me up or what they ask me, it's things like this, right? Like, how do we have a conversation? How do we solve a problem around reaching a consumer, especially in digital, and doing it in a way that's engaging and interesting, and keeping them in the mix as opposed to just driving a conversion. And so I do value that. I do value, that conversation and the ask, and I want to make sure that I can be able to communicate that. And so that's why we're doing things like this, right? Is that I've stepped that up this year, and making myself more accessible to be able to teach and help others learn about what digital marketing and what marketing is overall.
Yeah, and I definitely love how we met on Matchmaker, and we were able to make a lot of connections on there. I don't know when you joined; that was pretty early on, but to go on so many different shows, and actually experience the different interviews and people's experiences, different ways of explaining the same topics too, differently.
Yeah, it's just a completely different social network, as it were. But it's been a completely interesting and fun experience to be able to connect in the way that we're doing right now, and just have real conversations about what's happening today, whether it's marketing or even just in the general space around business.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, because something you mentioned about putting things on the back burner. Interviews were something I always wanted to do, but I never knew how I could really get into it.
Sure.
And somehow Matchmaker was able to ignite that. So you're, I think, my 75th interview at this point.
Wow. That's amazing.
And that's insane.
Yeah.
Yeah. Since May. Yeah.
That's
so
awesome.
I'm just really excited for people like you to come on and just have this great conversation.
Well, thanks for having me, for sure.
Here, and I really like the whole idea how you met people like Gary Vee, DJ Khaled, and you network with so many amazing people. So what are some of the lessons you've gotten from your wide network?
Yeah, I think it's looking and recognizing that everyone that's notable in these spaces has hustled. I don't think the hustle mindset is for everyone. There's different ways to get at the results that you're trying to do, and some of the hustle leads to burnout. It's real, right? And mental health and the awareness around that is something that is so key and so critical for an individual, anyone, for them to recognize within themselves, like, how am I doing? Does that matter? And so even for polymaths, right? Because there's a strong ability for us to burn out, attempting to try and do everything that we're trying to do. But I think around that, it's really, for me, recognizing, like, what do these individuals stand for? What do they care about? And I may not necessarily agree with every principle, but I think finding the pieces that resonate with my personal ethos and my value set, and then saying, like, what can I get from this person to understand them, right? DJ Khaled, his book, like, I was like, okay, that's super cool. I'm going to read his book, right? I'm going to, Gary Vee is huge. There's some things I don't agree with, but I love a lot of what he has to say in his path. And I think looking at each individual journey, the founder of Reddit, right? And saying like, how do these people come up? How do they start what they start? What can I learn from that and bring into my own? And then in some ways reflect it back out, right? And put that back out into the marketplace to strengthen what all of us are trying to do.
Well, I think a lot of polymathing people too like to take bits and pieces and put it together in a unique way. And that's kind of what you're doing there.
Right. Exactly.
Well, and it's interesting. Gary Vee actually got me out of burnout, I think, because back in 2017, I hit a deep burnout. I stopped working out. I stopped enjoying doing my hobbies and stopped doing any kind of content creation. And if it wasn't for his books, like I started trying to figure out what can I do to get the self-development habit back going again. I decided to read his books because he had 5 or 6 at that point. He had just launched Crushing It that next month. And so I was going through all his books up until that launch so I could read that afterwards. Yeah. And I managed to read 5 books in a month time span.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah. It was just one of those things I thought that was kind of interesting because burnout does suck and it does happen. I think polymaths, like you astutely mentioned there too, we're bound to hit it a little bit more often because of the divergent interests, so to speak.
Yeah, I think it's about the focus, right? Because it's making time for yourself, it's making time for your family, it's making time for the things that matter to you, but also making time for the hustle. And I think, as you block it out, like that focus to be able to do that and stay on pace is a big key of what matters in keeping yourself level.
Yeah. And so something I heard you mention on one of the other shows was about voice search. Just a quick question real quick. How does someone rank high in voice search?
Yeah, it's funny. I did a presentation series last year on voice search when it was a little bit hotter topic. I think it's fallen a little bit by the wayside just because there's so much other things happening right now, but it's still incredibly important, especially as you look at the rise of voice devices like Alexa, Siri, and other things happening in the space, Google as well. But it's really, at the core of it, it's an SEO exercise. And so if you think about how you're optimizing for Google, it's really that zero search result is what we call it. And it's you being at that top spot, because if you think about, if you're on a search result for Google and you see the string of results on voice, it's only the first result. You're that answer box result is a good way to think about it. And so if you're aiming for the answer box, if you're in the answer box, you will be the voice search result for that specific piece. And a good piece of note is that Google actually gives a lot more credit for brands and what they have to say about themselves and their products than individuals or bloggers that have about that. So if you're a brand and you're not producing content, you should be viewing yourself brand as publisher. You're the authority in your space, and fight for that answer box placement about your product, service, FAQ, whatever it is, because that's how you will win at voice search.
Interesting. One of the things I did pretty early on with my newer blog is SpeechKit.io, which converts your text into an audio thing that people can listen to.
Okay, yeah.
And so that way people can listen to the audio that way. But obviously it's not really search, but it's just optimizing for audio, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I wonder how more things you can do like that to optimize for audio SEO.
Yeah, there's some, Google has some tactics, I think, on how to do that. But again, a lot of it comes back to a voice exercise. And there's a couple layers of voice search, right? Some of it is just voice to result. And it's literally like just a search result, which is sort of what we're talking about here. What's happening now is that, especially as Google's advancing, it's getting into more phrasing search, and it's getting more progressive in terms of sequencing. Because as you know, especially if you ask Siri, right? It's like, hey, what about this? And it gives you an answer, and you're like, okay, well, what about the next thing? Maybe second step question or whatnot. It has no idea what's happening. Google's really the most advanced in terms of sequential search, where you can almost have a conversation about a topic and bounce back and forth to continue to advance that discussion. I think that's where the AI is starting to increase and get better. But again, if you don't have those answers in your base, it's not going to be able to contextualize that conversation without having that full narrative there. So it's really interesting to think about, especially for brands, especially for individuals, as you're talking about either your niche, your topic, your product, or your service, being able to fully describe it and making sure that you're winning that visibility for those things.
So what was your experience like as the co-host of the Social Currency podcast?
Yeah, I had a lot of fun with that. It was my colleague, Jessica Jensen. We went to grad school together, and she and I just always connected around marketing in general. We ran the marketing club at Pepperdine when we were there, did a lot of things around that. And so we got together. We're like, hey, what might be cool is taking this a little bit different angle than some of the marketing shows that are out there, and addressing more on the executive level and the people that are executing strategy and thinking about this for their business. A lot of times you walk into a room and there's, the SMEs who know their channel very specific. I know Facebook, I know, Instagram, I know how to run an ad campaign on Google. But for an executive who's, like, what is the value of an impression? How do you convince someone to build out a campaign for social? How do you convince them the value of content when there's not necessarily a mid-funnel model for how that's attributed? Those are the conversations that we started to have. And it was actually interesting because it took it up a level from a lot of the podcasts that are out there around practitioner level content. Like, here's how to build a campaign. Here's how to do these things. Here's how to film a video, and take it up one level to say, hey, if you're walking into a room and you're talking to an executive, here's how to explain that to an executive. Or if you're an executive, here's what these things mean, and breaking it down in somewhat simplistic terms, but also in accessible ways for people to be able to understand some of the more complex topics, especially in digital marketing.
It almost seems like you're starting with the why, so to speak.
Right. Yeah. And I think a lot of that comes from, me bridging and coming up through the ranks in the digital marketing space, as it were, and now at the executive level, understanding that I'm in a room with a lot of people that have, in some cases, zero context because they haven't come up through that, and trying to connect the dots. Again, I feel like a lot of anyone's role within an organization, especially if you're in digital, is education. And then much of that internal as much as it is running it externally. And so that education piece of working with the executive team, even individuals that are executing programs, even new people coming up that may not necessarily have the breadth of experience, helping understand what's happening in the space, why does it matter, and what do these things mean for the business, and how can we use them to our best advantage?
This is interesting too, and just seeing how different people can perceive it differently. And so it seems like the stint has finished at this point. Was it just because you finished school, or why did the podcast end? Yeah,
I think we sort of ran a course, as it were, and then we were like, hey, let's take a break, and we may bring it back at some point. It was a good subject. We had great guests. There was a lot of interest for it. I think we just ran out of somewhat of time and separate interest for a little bit. We took a break over summer, and then like I said, we might reboot it again because I think it was a good topic set. And there's a lot of potential for it still.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I noticed that there's a lot of really interesting topics too that are different than other shows, because I was listening to some of it before, obviously before this.
Yeah.
And I'm interested to go through more of it too, and see if I can get more why out of it and like understand more than what I might have already knew too. So I'm excited.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think a lot of the content is evergreen, at least for the next couple of years, because a lot of it is relevant and contextual to what's happening now in the broader sense of digital.
Yeah. Well, and even if it's not evergreen in like 5 years from now, the ideas and the way you're structuring the philosophy, so to speak, I think is very applicable to new ideas too down the line.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And I think the reason why we came up with the name social currency was, if you look at what that means in context, is you as an influencer in space, as you build up more authority based on the content and the value that you're giving back to your audience, it's building up your social currency, and you can enable other social currency by that value exchange and giving them the ability to share that information and become an authority in their space. So we really felt like that was a good lean in for us sharing with executives and other leaders of businesses, or even entrepreneurs, right? Starting up, to help them understand not only just the technology, but also the strategy, to your point, because those things apply over time.
Mm-hmm. And I find that there's a good balance between why and how are the ones that lead to the most successful endeavors.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. So in 2018, it seems that you actually took advantage of IGTV pretty well and made some quality content out there, especially since I've seen a lot of people not do like headings on the images, for example. Which really went out of your way to do that and whatnot. But since then, you haven't really done much in that area. So what have you done with Reels and IGTV? What made you stop creating on both?
Yeah, it's like, oh no, you're calling me out. I mean, I think a lot of these things are just, I mentioned focus. I lost focus on some of those, and I dropped them just because I didn't have time for them. Like I said, there's some more stuff coming, and I'm getting more into, some of the video pieces of what I want to start sharing out on. And I've been doing more teaching and instructing this year. I've been on more conferences. Nice, because there's an opportunity like we have here to just go more virtual. I was actually on teaching at a conference in Belgium last week, and they were translating it into French, which was awesome, right? It's the cool opportunities like that happen in a global environment and during a pandemic, but also because we have this technology available to us. But I think for me, it is looking at the platforms and saying what advantage, testing them out, seeing how they worked. A lot of these are just purely tests to see, do they work? How do they work? How do I do my best here? But not always for myself. It's understanding it for the business side as well. So I can say, yeah, I've done IGTV. I can know what can work there and whatnot. I may not be driving it every day, but I've been in the space enough to understand that this is how you would use it for these specific reasons.
Well, I mean, sure, I kind of called you out there, but it was more also curious because we talked about experimenting. We talked about dipping your hand in that cookie
Yeah,
jar. And if it
exactly.
doesn't work, pivoting too.
Yeah.
And I think that you do, like you said, you had the experience to teach other people as well, which is very important.
Yeah. I don't think IGTV was anything other than that, which is an experiment, right? TikTok was an experiment. It worked out for a little bit. And now people are like, why don't you post it? I mean, people like still this week, I've got like 5, like, why aren't you posting? We miss your content. It's like, yeah, but I loved it. It was fun. And now I'm kind of, out of the mindset of it and I'm on the next thing. But now my next thing is teaching people about TikTok and how to move on TikTok and do better with it themselves.
You know what's interesting? I see a lot of parallels between us. I'm actually kind of been getting kind of bored of TikTok, to be kind of honest. I know that's sacrilege in a way for some people,
absolutely.
but I'm wondering if maybe more educational content will be more entertaining for me because I like teaching. I think you're the same way too, where you have that ability to teach and explain things simply.
Yep.
And so maybe both of us are going that education route.
Yeah, I think you could have really tight teaching, right? You look at a great example is the fitness industry, and a lot of them have pivoted obviously to IG Live and doing things on YouTube and the rest of that. Even Zoom, right? Zoom classes and whatnot. But even fitness on TikTok is doing really well. They're doing 15-second, like here's one move, here's one tip, right? Just enough to get you motivated for the day. And you put enough of those together, you got a workout. One of those may just be the one thing you need for today.
I don't know if I mentioned this, but I've been teaching swim lessons for nearly 8 years. I'm a personal trainer and a waterworks instructor. So I did not actually do that. Like that was the one thing I didn't do at the beginning of quarantine is create fitness content.
Check it out. There's a ton going on. There's a lot of opportunity, I think, in the fitness space. And I think there's some really creative ways to interpret even just things like push-up challenges and the rest of those, to get people motivated. Yeah,
for sure. And that's something I definitely think about. One of the next phases for PolyInnovator is actually going to be around exercise. So I need to just maybe accelerate that.
Yeah. It's a hot space right now.
So there's a lot of new features coming left and right, such as the Reels recently, and then guides, which are some kind of like course-looking thing on Instagram, and now shopping, like you mentioned earlier.
Yep.
It seems like they're trying to take a holistic or even polymathic approach to their services on Instagram specifically. What are your thoughts on these companies' experiments?
Yeah, I think and any of the bigger celebrities in our industry, like a Gary Vee, the rest of them will talk to this. But all these platforms, they sort of start out in their thing, right? Like Instagram was just photos, Facebook was and Twitter was just updates, microblogging, and all the rest of these. But a lot of them evolve into becoming much larger CMS platforms that you can distribute content. And that's really what they do. And they do a little bit different flavor on each, but you can kind of do the same thing on everything, right? Like Twitter just introduced what's the little stories thing? I forget the name of them, but Twitter basically has stories. Thank you. Fleets. Yeah. Twitter basically has stories now, right? Instagram has stories. They stole that from Snapchat that had stories. And they brought it over to Facebook has stories. Now WhatsApp has stories. It's like everybody's got the thing. LinkedIn's got stories, right? Because they want to start being a consumer platform. So I think it's a lot of this is that there's this repetition that happens. A lot of them copy each other and they just all start to become a little bit the same flavor. You can upload a video, you can upload a photo, you can put audio, you can put a post, and then you could say, hey, which platform is that? It's pretty much all of them at this point. So I think it's all of them trying to adapt. I really love what Facebook and Instagram are doing around shopping right now. I actually love what Pinterest is doing around shopping right now. There's a huge opportunity for commerce. You mentioned Hasbro at the beginning. We were trying to explore this. We had to build shops in tabs with embeds. We were trying to figure out how to get people to shop on Facebook because we could drive someone from an ad in there and say, hey, this is almost like the same thing as TV, but you actually buy here right now without leaving your phone. And that was a huge value proposition to potentially deliver. But that was 10 years ago, right? This is now like the point where finally shopping's coming into these spaces, but it's so much more natural because you can identify products and visuals. You can connect it to the shopping experience, never have to leave the app. TikTok is actually launching that next year. They already have it in the ad product. They're going to be delivering that as part of that context. You can already see some of the tie-ups happening with Shopify, with Teespring, and some of these other ones. E-commerce is going to be a huge part of social going forward. I think it makes a ton of sense. And you see where else is happening, online learning, right? We're talking about that. Yeah. It makes sense for them to bring that on as well. I think there's a little bit of bloat that happens in some of these platforms. They lose a little bit of focus. Reels is great, but it's a copycat. And everyone would say it's not even close to what TikTok can deliver in terms of that. But it's another way for people to engage. It's another place for people to distribute content. It's another way for people to actually spend more time in the app. So I think these things won't stop unless they see something that completely does not work. They'll just keep expanding and trying to find ways because the whole thing is that they're monetizing attention. And if they can do that with more features, then off they go.
Yeah, I will say that Reels had a lot of issues with me. I couldn't get the work multiple times where I tried to upload a video or make a native video. It just wouldn't work. Yeah. And I do think it's interesting. Something you mentioned was that how these platforms are like a content management system, a CMS. And I realized that, but never thought about it so much. And it makes a lot of sense. I actually made a micro polycast a little while back towards summertime around the future of social media.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's really interesting, this thought experiment I had where all these different platforms, Pinterest and Instagram, they're both picture-based platforms. Obviously, Instagram's growing bigger, more into commerce. But what if the future of social media isn't a matter of what channel you're on, but there's just a giant content management system underneath it, this API layer, so to speak. That's where your content actually embeds. And so you're not posting to Instagram. You're just using Instagram as the catalyst to post into that grander CMS.
Yeah.
And so that same image will pop up on Facebook and Pinterest and Instagram, despite the fact they're different channels, which I think will be interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like Facebook's getting closer to that, which is why they're getting an antitrust lawsuit, because they've got these things together and they're trying to, supposedly be anti-competitive. We'll see how that goes. Really hard to prove that, and I think break it up. But at the end of the day, if you post one video, you can now go across, right? If you got one messaging system, you can message people from Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp all at the same time. They're intentionally weaving those things together, one, to make it harder to break apart, but two, because there's that value, like you said, of being able to move your content and find your audience, whatever platform you're on.
Yeah, and we talked about automation earlier. There's one automation that I do. I can't spend too much time on Pinterest right now. I'm focused on other platforms, but I still want to be on there in some way. So I do have an automation of like getting my Instagram posts to Pinterest because I don't mind cross-posting those places there. And I try to make sure I still post natively on both. But it's one of those things where it is kind of a cross-pollination, so to speak.
Right. And I think you can do that, especially with those visual, more static platforms like that, because you can tie up a message, a narrative with the visual. And I think that works well. To your point, you can do that between Instagram, Pinterest, and even Facebook.
Yeah. Well, but alternatively, there's people who try to do that with like Twitter, where they post their Instagram, like, hey, I got a new Instagram post here. And I'll see these profiles. Literally just this week, I saw a profile that's literally just links to Instagram.
Yeah.
Just long list. That's the bad kind of automation right there. I just wanted to bring up, so to speak.
Yeah. And that's sort of why I think I was picking at it a little bit earlier, because I think the risk of automation is if you're not intentional with how you're distributing, to your point. And I see those profiles too, and they're just reposting links from Instagram. It's like, come on, like how does, and they're like, why isn't it working? Right. Like,
well, at least have other stuff there too.
Right? Yeah. What's that?
Yeah. I said, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there, but at least have different stuff, Yeah. If you're going to repost, do more. Like, just do a lot more.
Or just take the same image and take the first line of your post and post it over there, and then post the link.
Natively.
I mean, that's easy. It takes 3 extra seconds, but they're not being as thoughtful.
Yeah. Native post, so to speak.
Yeah.
And this is kind of one of those fun questions, but I scrolled down to your first TikTok.
Yeah.
And it was you at Chuck E. Cheese ride with dubstep in the background. And so, ironically, that's a great way to describe TikTok's essence, so to speak. And so what made you create that first vid? Not just experimentation, but like, what was the thought?
It was funny because, like I mentioned, I deleted my account a bunch of times, and I was just like, I'm just going to try whatever, because I don't know, like, I still haven't figured out the platform yet. And I was at Chuck E. Cheese, and I had found this song, and I'm like, this song is so intense. And I love it. And I was like, I got to find something that's so in contrast with the music that it's ridiculous. And so you'll see a lot of my posts are like that. It's intentionally and somewhat mocking of itself. And so I put that in this little ridiculous riding machine that it's going so slowly. And I think I found it funny, and I'm like, maybe this is funny, and people found it funny, and started to pick up. And so some of that theme was just me being as ridiculous in some ways as possible, because I think the over the top nature works really well in TikTok, especially.
Yeah, that's one reason why I wanted to bring it up. So I really like that idea. And just being ridiculous has kind of been my philosophy too. At the beginning of the pandemic, I didn't have weights at home. And as someone who works as a personal trainer, like, I need exercise. And so I was like, okay, what can I do to curl?
Yeah.
I have a futon that's like a modern futon, right? And it has a big bar at the back. And so I'm just sitting here curling that to like a funny song in the background. It's like, he's like, damn, boy, he thick. That's a thick.
Yeah.
And it's like that audio that's really popular. And I was just doing that to that audio. And it's like, that's perfect.
Yeah. I mean, you're going to be right up there with Chris Hemsworth, because he did this video where he was out and he was like at someone's house or something, and it didn't have anything, right? So he used milk jugs and like a couple things lying around the house to do a workout. And it was like, it got huge play because people were like, I have that stuff. I can do it, right? I can be Chris Hemsworth. I think you did a brilliant job with that.
Thank you. And one thing I will say, just a tip to the audience, is that you could take empty water milk jugs into the pool and get a good workout with that resistance there of the buoyancy.
That's a pro tip right there. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so it does seem like you like to subvert expectations, like you said, with the audio there and a lot of your vids, which is certainly a great way to create content, like we mentioned. What are some other strategies, I guess you could say, that you've employed on TikTok, for example?
Yeah, I think one of them is like you mentioned, it's how do you catch that attention? It's something that's a little off or a little bit different or a little bit catchy, just to create that moment of surprise, or like, oh, I want to check this out a little bit further. I think that's a huge piece of any online content, is that initial hook to get people into the content. I think the other piece that is helpful, especially in the construction of a video, and I actually put 9 points together. I'll send it to you. Is like how to create a perfect video for TikTok. These are things that took some research to figure out and some experimentation on my own. But it was the next piece is like step through the narrative. Don't give people everything at once. Also, don't make them wait all the way because they're going to drop because they're like the buildup may not be there. It's step them through it a little bit at a time. So it's almost like you're doling it out a little bit. And then you get that closer. It's like, oh, and especially if that's a flip or something that completely changes what they were expecting to see at the end, that creates a huge hook for people to rewatch again. And so there's ways to kind of capture the attention and keep it. Some of it's a little bit at a time, initial hook, right? That 3 seconds, like we talked about for any platform that works. And then also, how do you close strong? And I think that's like with anything, like with comedy, with TV shows, right? The cliffhanger, all the rest of that is anything that's great to a story. That sort of follows how you build content in any of these platforms that are video-based, especially TikTok.
Yeah, it made me think of a couple things where I was taking this mini course on traits of virality, and one of the things was subverting expectations like that. So if you could do a curveball at the end, is really big. One thing I've noticed on TikTok too is some people are they're reposting videos or something like that, or they're sharing things that may not be their own. But there's one trend that's basically they'll have like, okay, this is the first part, and then they'll cut it off intentionally to do a second part. But a lot of people get really mad about that. So there's even another guy who came in and actually just retold the story very quickly to get it in that minute time span.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things where they were trying to dull it out over time and get people to come follow or come look at their profile through that mechanism, but it actually kind of backfires. It makes people more angry about it. But so that the point is to have it in the video, not multiple parts like that. You can have multiple parts if it's a long story that you're doing or something like that.
Yeah.
But don't force people to do it.
I think you're totally right. I think it works. It doesn't work most of the time. I think it works on occasion. It's funny, this guy that I was working with, and he and I were neck and neck in followers, and we were keeping track of each other. And after I left, I came back 2 months later and he had 1 million followers. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like this guy popped like fast. And I went back and he had one of those videos, and that's where he took a corner, and he had this video where he was telling a story about prom or something, and he stopped right in the middle. And then you're like, it's almost like abrupt, like you didn't even expect it to end. And then it was, you see in the caption, like, watch my next video. And that was the video that had like, I don't know, 3 million views or something like that. And then the next video had about half that, but then his follower count went through the roof because everyone was just like, I got to find out what's happening next. And it was really interesting strategy. And then he had been sort of like us, like trying out different things and doing the rest of that. He stripped down all that content and he went into this more like straight to camera vlog type format of these 2-part stories. And that's where he just took off. And it was really interesting to see that approach because he was like, this worked. I'm going to do that all the time. And then he went that direction. Not all the videos pop, right? But a lot of them do have that take rate because they're waiting for that second part and people want to find out what happens next. I
wonder if he was the reason why there was a lot of copycats or whatnot afterwards.
It could be. Yeah, absolutely.
I will say, like, I'm disappointed about the growth that I've had because I've just not been experimenting enough, and that's on me, right? But there's this one person who I saw this summer, call me Chris. I literally followed her when she had less than 10K or whatnot, and she has 10 million now.
Wow.
I can't even be mad about that because I'm just so happy for her.
I know,
like,
right?
That is insane. 10 million in that short time span.
Yeah. I think it's so cool to see that. And I mean, it speaks to the value of the platform, power of the algorithm. And again, if you're listening, you're on TikTok, there's a huge organic opportunity still on TikTok. Yeah. I mean, if you think about the organic platforms that are left, it's TikTok first, LinkedIn second, Pinterest third, everything else you have to pay for. It's really hard to gain growth in some of the platforms, and at least in social. And, there's such an opportunity there. You can see that, right? There are some people that have the ability to just find that one window and then drive a bus through it. And all of a sudden they have over 1 million followers. And by the way, those people are making money, right? Because they have, once you get to that 1 million follower level, you're making money. And it's a good opportunity. So, try it out and keep focusing on the metrics, right? Look at what time of day you should be posting. When is your audience most online? What is working in terms of your audience? Who is in your audience? What, videos are popping? What content it makes sense for them, and stick with that. I think a lot of times all of us, because we do have multiple interests, we do go all over the place. Maybe it's not too niche to your point earlier, right? But finding in that window of who you are and then what content resonates and going after that.
Well, and let's also differentiate the idea of like having a niche. Like, oh, this Call Me Chris, her niche originally was just kind of these facial expressions to different songs and whatnot. That ended up being the content type, but she also had this kind of like comedy or reactionary niche, so to speak.
Okay, yeah.
And that's what she's expanded onto skits, but it's still comedy. That's kind of her niche, so to speak. But like, there's also, like you said, the different kind of content types, whether they're vlogging or educational or funny or meme or doing it like you did there with the different songs.
Yeah.
So those are the kind of content types, but it's not necessarily a niche. So I think that's a good differentiation to make.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of ways to try it. So, I think it goes back to there's basic types of content, and there's how-tos, there's vlogging style, there's instructional, there's sort of documentary. Pick which one works for you and then experiment within that and figure out, what actually your value is to your audience.
Yeah. So one last question here before we end up wrapping up here. And this is one of those more like curveball questions, so to speak, but we're both a fan of Dr. Seuss, absolutely. I noticed. And what sort of philosophy do you resonate most with him on?
I think it's funny now because you read Dr. Seuss and they're fun. If you go back, like that guy was a provocateur. He broke the book industry. They hated him. And he wrote stuff that, was very controversial at the time because it didn't follow format. It wasn't see Dick, run, see Jane run. It was very different in terms of the nature of it, right? In terms of structure of language, inventing words, things that didn't work, right? And I love that because he was a disruptor and intentionally. But what worked with it was that it was disruptive, but it was fun. And he found his own way to make something completely different, accessible, but also teach kids about rhyming and enjoying imagination and a lot of different things that books weren't necessarily trying to teach at that time. And I enjoy it now still, right? Fox and Socks and the rest of these things as the video's on. So much as a competitive reading exercise to see how fast I can read it without messing up. But the creativity behind those stories is really what drives me. And I love it. And I will always be a fan.
Yeah. Well, I think that one thing that was interesting was that he actually had a lot of underlying meanings behind a lot of his. There was a cartoon where there was two different factions kind of trying to build the biggest gun, so to speak.
Yeah.
And it was an analogy to the Cold War.
Yep.
And then there's obviously the Lorax, which talks about like deforestation and stuff like that, environmental stuff. And I thought that was really interesting how a lot of his had a lot of hidden meanings behind it as well.
Yeah, I mean, even I was reading the Places You'll Go last night to one of my kids, and there's this whole section about, you'll run into troubles, you'll run into challenges, you'll run into stuff that you don't want to deal with. Keep going. You'll find space after that. You'll continue to achieve, and you'll be in a better place. And there's even one section about how you'll sometimes end up a spot where there's just everyone's waiting. This waiting room where everyone's just waiting for something. And it goes back to what we're talking about, like, don't hesitate, keep going, be always on and keep moving. And that was so interesting because there is this waiting room. I think a lot of people are stuck in the waiting room and they're waiting around. And Dr. Seuss does that in a very illustrative way. And yet encourages you to move past. And I think that's the point, is that don't wait, keep moving. And to your points here is like, there are stories behind the stories, and that's what's powerful about it.
Yes, and kind of going back to the analogy that I mentioned earlier, but sister, she was afraid to go against that boss, but as soon as she just kept moving and going into it, she was finally able to do it. Yeah. And there was one more analogy I actually wanted to mention. I was teaching a fitness class today, and it's an older generation that I'm teaching, and some of them have to worry about falling and having balance.
Right.
And one of the lessons I shared with them is that sometimes balance doesn't come from strength or like staying in one place. It's actually movement. So there is a martial arts called Bagua, that's circle walking, where they're constantly moving and in motion. And because of that, I was a lifeguard, and there was these skinny little walls with tons of water on top of them, always slippery. You can't even imagine how many times I fell in the pool. But I learned that if I use the Bagua and stay moving and stay in that constant motion, it allowed me to stay more balanced by that inertia, so to speak. I think it's a good analogy towards those experimentations and staying out of the waiting room, so to speak.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think, when we're off balance, that's when we learn the most, because it gives us an ability to again, if you're focused, on the end, you can move through that imbalance to keep moving, right? And sometimes just moving faster helps you with your balance, to your point, because there is movement that helps solve for that versus trying to readjust all the time.
Yeah. And so speaking of movement, where can the audience move to find you online?
Yeah, sure. My website, tuckross.com. I'm at Tuck Ross on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and come say hi. I love chat. Obviously, we're here having a great conversation about pretty much endless topics. And so, I think, especially if you're looking to learn more about TikTok, you can go to follow on TikTok. I actually just also launched How to Build Your Influencer Media Kit. at tuckross/influencer. So if you're curious about that, come figure out what needs to go into your media kit. Even if you have about 1,000 followers, upwards of 10,000 as a nano or micro influencer, you have potential to make brand deals just by packaging what you have with your niche, your personal brand, and marketing that in a smart way. So come check that out, tuckross.com/influencer.
Well, and I have tons of links in the description for you there to
sure.
make sure people can find you.
That's great.
I always try to make sure that, like, I hate it when I go on a video and I see like, oh, this is an awesome person, and they don't have any links in the description. Like, I want to look at all the different stuff they have. So yeah, I make sure I do.
Absolutely.
And then what could be a call to growth beyond just a call to action today?
Yeah, I think, we talked about fear, and we're in a time of our lives that we may never see again in this way, where pandemic, it freezes people. There's fear. Like, I don't want to go outside. Maybe I'm worried about the pandemic. Maybe I'm worried about the virus and these things. I don't know how to deal with home, work, the situations. I don't know how to adapt my strategy for my business. Again, focus on your values, focus on that merging that experience and the product and service, and meet your customer where they are. They're going through some of the same struggles that you're thinking about. How do you help solve for those? That is a North Star for anyone, any business as they move forward. And the call to growth here really is to, again, be always on, keep moving. Even in a land of imperfect information, it's that confidence to move forward, because that will bring your teams with you. That'll bring your business with you. Stay focused on the strategy, and the key here being that you'll end up at the end of the day in the right place, even if you have a little bit of mud that you're pushing through along the way.
I love that. Thank you so much.
Sure.
And so once again, this is Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator, and Tuck Ross on the Polymath Polycast. Thank you for coming.
Dustin, thanks so much for having me. Great conversation. Appreciate being here.